we're here in front of the Pierre Memorial Garden. Wonder if you can just tell us how this came to be, first of all.
Yeah, after Pierre's death, we obviously wanted to do something, a variety of things really. The club had erected a major shrine to him in East London Cemetery, which is a really fitting tribute. But we wanted to do something here at his place of work. And there are one or two things we've done over the time to support the family, etc. But we wanted on a certain anniversary perhaps to have a mark. It's amazing when someone says to you it was 10 years ago, you just can't relate to the fact it was 10 years ago. But we thought on the 10th anniversary it'd be fitting to use the money that was donated. So the supporters of Charlton, who in large numbers supported this fund, effectively provided the money for this to happen. And Pierre loved this place of work so much. I think he would like the fact that it was actually based, at really what was his second home.
Yeah. I know you said it was arguably the biggest thing of your time here, working as chief executive of the club. Tell me about as it happened. And
well, a lot of people don't realise, because obviously the whole thing extended for me in particular. The whole thing extended over such a long period of time. Obviously I was away. I got the phone call from Mick Brown first of all to say that Pierre had gone missing, and they didn't know whether he'd been missing in the lake or missing, somewhere in the Aldershot camp. And so obviously I came straight back from holiday. I went down with the family to the training camp, which was as you can then by then quite an emotional sight, marked up with the boy where he'd gone down. And then we had the police investigation with Matt and I. We had to deal with the counsellors, and of course the staff and many of the players were traumatised. A lot of people don't also realise that probably we could have lost 2 or 3 more players on the day. There were Neil McCafferty, I know, was resuscitated on the side of the lake, so the disaster could actually have been much worse. From that we had to sort of sort out the issues with not only the individuals with counselling, but we had to sort out the witness statements, because there was now a formal police inquiry, and that dragged on over a period of time. There was obviously then the funeral, which was a very sort of emotional day in many ways, because it was difficult for us as club officials, because in a sense we weren't really wanted there, because he was in our trust, and the truth is that we lost him on a training camp, which should never have happened. So there was a degree of anger, emotion, etc. around the family there. So obviously that was difficult to deal with him without Matt and Jeff Heskins at the time and the counsellors. I think a lot of us would have found it even more difficult to deal with, because in a sense there's nobody you can talk to. You can talk to in the workplace about that. Then there was the trial, which seemed to go on for weeks and weeks. There were lots of incidents at the trial, which has obviously got a huge amount of media coverage. And then obviously we had to deal afterwards with a whole load of issues which related to the legal side of things. So it wasn't just, for me in particular, it wasn't just something happened on a day and then it was it. It extended over quite a long period of time. And added to that, he was a left-sided player. My son was a left-sided player, so we were sort of behind him. So they trained together and all the rest of it. And anybody who knew Pierre knew that he always took the younger ones under his wing. He never really left here in the afternoons. If I come up for meetings with Alan Kirbishley, he was the one kid who was always in reception. He seemed to not want to go home. He just sort of loved it so much here. And of course, Alan had high hopes for him of being a left back here. So all in all, it was just a tragedy from start to finish.
Matt, training ground chaplain at the time and so on, which you still are obviously, but how was it in the aftermath with all the counselling you had to give the academy players, the academy staff? And obviously, he'd just been on the trip with the first team as well to the West Country, so the first team knew him very well as well. Yeah,
I mean, as Peter said, he was a character around the training ground and had been for years, so everybody here knew him. So my involvement was one-to-one with all of the individuals who wanted to talk, and that did vary from, as you say, there were first team players who he had gone on tour with only a week or so before. And they couldn't understand it, and they needed just to talk about things, get things off their chest. So I had some conversations with some of them. Obviously the boys that were in the water at the time had a lot of emotions to work through. The club were great in terms of getting in professional counsellors, and that was excellent, but
It's good to have someone
to have
who's
someone
there
else
on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
as well,
exactly,
isn't it?
because things come up with something as major as that. You can have counselling at the time, but then a month later, even a year later, it hits you again. And so to be around and be able to talk to individuals like that. There was a youngster on trial who was here for a couple of weeks. I remember walking around this training ground, just chatting it through with him and asking how he felt and just getting him to talk it out a bit. And then you might remember this, but on the anniversary, the first anniversary, we had a brief service here for all of the training ground staff, and I remember all cramming into the canteen area and taking this service, just sort of 10 or 15 minutes, some reflection, some prayer, just to help people in a way to move on at that point for those who could. So it was, for a period, it was quite intensive, and then it was picking up things ongoing. And even now, you know, people in football, we're 10 years on, I still come into contact with those who were around at the time. Spoken to some the last couple of weeks who've moved on from the club and still want to talk about it. So something like major like that is going to have that effect.
Tell me about the Memorial Garden in particular and how it was constructed, because we got volunteers in from the Prince's Trust, the Community Trust helped, training ground groundsman staff, Paul Geary and his staff, they all contributed in some frankly terrible weather at times last year, earlier this year rather. You saw it going up, you know, stage by stage, didn't you?
Yeah, probably about 6 months to 9 months ago, Peter and I chatted about it, aware that the 10th anniversary was coming up and aware of the funds that were available. We looked over here at the right sort of site for it because we wanted it to be used by everybody and didn't want it stuck away in a corner. That wouldn't have been appropriate. And then it just so happened that the Prince's Trust were coming here to be based for about a month, I think it was, back in February, March time. And so chatting it through with Paul Geary, the groundsman, he came up with this idea. He said, well, why don't we use the Prince's Trust to get involved? Which was a fantastic idea, because the youngsters who've been building it were the same sort of age as Pierre was when he died. And so they got stuck into it. And you're right, the weather was atrocious. I mean, every time I turned
we had
up...
first team games postponed and all sorts, didn't we? It was snow, it was rain.
And then rain. And there were troughs here that were just flooded, and every time you come in, and all they were doing was bailing it out, hoping that they were going to be able to do a bit more. But of course, eventually the weather turns. So they were great doing that, and the other staff here, Paul and Mark, and those who've been involved in it, Sean as well, have done a really good job. Everybody's really got involved and made it work, haven't they?
Yeah, it's been a fantastic way of effort. I mean, Mick Brown's been here, one of our former employees, the last few days, has put the whole thing together. And nobody's sort of taking money for this, which is sort of, you know, a fantastic gesture on all their parts.